So let's talk about something new that's just popped up in reality. This is a real thing. Forensic desk engineering. Forensic engineers that are at a desk that never show up on site, and they're putting together an opinion on whether or not something is damaged by hail or wind and repairability and all that noise. I got Chad Williams with Valor Engineering Group sitting with me to talk about this new phenomenon that doesn't make any sense.
How you doing?
What's going on?
Not a whole lot.
This is a crazy thing, right?
I thought you were kidding when you mentioned it to me. I thought it was a joke.
It's not a joke. I've had plenty. In the last 2 weeks, 5 different public adjusters have brought this up to me, talking about an issue that they had with this very specific issue. There weren't all PAs. A few of them were contractors, but I've even gotten a couple copies of those reports. I know you've seen at least one of those. So this is a real phenomenon. Is it okay to desk engineer?
There's a lot of questions with this whole thing. And what it comes down to is when the engineer is going to sign and seal a report, they have to have responsible charge. And I will clarify this a little bit and say the rules vary state to state. So you're going to want to make sure you look at your individual state's rules. And I'm referring to the states in which I practice. And this is a general understanding, not necessarily applicable to any one state. But you're going to have some way of saying, I'm the engineer. I looked at it. I have control over the work enough to know that I can render an opinion. And that doesn't mean that an engineer can't say, I've looked at it. Now I need to get this, that, or the other process done, like a test, and have somebody go do a test. That's to say they've got to be involved in it to command the work. And in general, that's going to mean they're involved in the front side, looking at it, defining what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. They're either going to be present on site or they're going to be directly involved with the person who is present on site. And then saying, hey, I'm looking at the photos. I'm looking at what you're getting here and there. I want to see this. I want to see that. And then they're going to be either writing the report themselves or they're going to be reviewing the report in order to establish that they have that direct responsible charge. What I saw...
That's the important term here, direct responsible charge, right?
Yes.
They've been involved from the very beginning. They've gotten whoever it is that's being sent out, they're in control of this individual. Does that person have to be an engineer?
No. Best analogy is you think about like a doctor. You go to the doctor and you say, hey, I'm not feeling well. He says, hey, I want to get some of these tests run. He may not go draw your blood, may not go look at it in the lab, may not go get your x-rays or CAT scans or whatever, but he's the one who's reviewing it. He's the one who's making the decision. He's the one who's command. And so for the engineer, basically following the same concept.
But you couldn't have a doctor that basically got someone that just had some blood that they had already taken out of someone without the doctor being kind of in control of what tests are being done. And suddenly he's making some review of it. This is an engineer that's supposed to be in direct responsible charge of the individual that went out on site beforehand and have direct knowledge of it beforehand. Is that right?
That's what the engineering rules have always said, is you have to have that direct responsible charge. You have to have that command presence to be involved. And so they want to make sure that the engineer that is signing off on the report has the knowledge to be able to testify, has the knowledge to be able to render those opinions. And if you're not involved, then there's a lot of question about how much information you actually have, how much you can actually be able to render those opinions.
I mean, if I'm an insurance company, if I could get away with it, I would send this desk engineer only the absolute best photos that show only the evidence that I want them to see. I wouldn't give them everything. I'm trying to save as much money as possible.
You know, that's certainly a possibility. I can't say that to speak to anyone's particular motivation, but I can certainly understand that. Unfortunately, there have been plenty of times in my career where I review photo logs and I'm kind of like, am I looking at the same site that I saw? And it certainly is a possibility. And I'm not going to say that it absolutely would be that way, but I can certainly understand the concern. And that's where it's really important that the person who's there is knowledgeable on how to document a site and that they're presenting what's there. You know, we want to make sure that we get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so if you're presenting photos and you're saying, I don't find any damage on this spot, and it's the one spot out of 10,000 that doesn't have it, you're not exactly lying, but you're not exactly presenting the whole story either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they Got an echo there. If we do, we can actually ignore the echo, and I'll cut this little snippet out right there because I'm getting the audio recordings either way. Matt, cut this part out, damn it. So if they do get this set of photos and they're asked to do it as a desk adjuster, and they're not creating their own investigation of this, they're only relying on what is presented to them, does a report from a forensic desk engineer even hold weight?
I would have a lot of questions about it. Ultimately, whether it holds weight would be up to the courts, but I would question whether or not there is sufficient firsthand knowledge to be able to render that opinion. And I think that's going to be up to the courts to decide. But I think we need to be thinking long and hard about our obligation at the end of the day to the health, welfare, and safety of the public. And we also need to be looking at, depending on the state, are we safeguarding property? And we need to make sure that as engineers, we're out there looking at what we can find and the evidence that's there. And unfortunately, if you do send somebody else out, you don't know the qualification, you don't know the experience, you don't know a great deal about how they went about doing that. So it's entirely possible that someone's doing the best that they can, but they're just missing so much. And because that set of photos gets hit to the engineer, what he gets is not a full picture. He or she is not getting a full picture.
Yeah, I would be very, very wary of anything that would come from a desk adjuster, especially on these short forms that we're seeing that are 1 or 2 pages long. There's what's even worse about some of them, they're making repairability assessments from photographs. Do you think that's even possible?
I think if it's so bad that you would just go, it's not repairable, then that's probably something that could be, in theory, done. I think you can look at it and say, look, this is just such bad shape that there's no way
You
we're
could
going to
say that it isn't. But could you say that it is?
I don't. I would really frown away from saying it is, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here when I say this, but there is a methodology that we put through NAFE, which is the National Academy of Forensic Engineers, particularly when it comes to asphalt composition shingles. I think it's a really powerful tool when we put it together, because basically we're saying,
is that just because you wrote it?
I wrote it in reaction to what I was seeing in industry. We were seeing
it's a fantastic report. It was peer reviewed too.
But it's important to put out there, the reason we wrote that paper and the reason we went down that path was because I was being brought out to look at secondary failures that were occurring after repairs were being done in accordance with insurance scopes. And people were saying that the scope of the repairs were being done incorrectly because we had a subsequent secondary failure. And it was like, well, what is going on here? And it led to a forensic investigation of why are we having these problems? And we started finding out that we do have issues with damage propagation and the inability to complete those repairs. So there's a way of doing it, but that's not going to be just done sitting in an office. And quite frankly, even just sitting in the field and looking at the shingles, you're really not going to be able to know. And so these guys that want to say they can do repairability and determine it without actually attempting to do it, I don't think they're really getting enough information to render an opinion properly.
I mean, I would highly suspect that they also don't even have the competence to do so if they did go on site anyway, especially without ever having made any kind of roof repair themselves or any repair of anything. They'd have to have someone who is good at doing that perform it and give their opinion, and then the engineer could report on what that opinion was. But if they're giving their own, especially from a desk, it just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense.
No.
So what do you do if you get one of these? What do you think?
I think that you need to hire your own engineer and go back and actually do the investigation correctly.
You want to list what states you're available in?
Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Arkansas, Missouri, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. I think I'm missing 1 or 2. Iowa. I think I'm missing a couple, but
14. Does that sound right?
It's somewhere in that range. I have to double check. I'm personally licensed.
That's a lot of states.
I'm licensed in 21 states. My firm,
21.
I think it's 15 that the company is currently in.
Yeah, you missed a few. But you gotta get somebody involved. I do know that there have been also some decently written complaints filed with the state departments of insurance, and as a result of those complaints, actual on-site forensic engineer has been hired. I don't know if that makes anything better or not, but at least they're going to have firsthand knowledge of what's going on. And you have the opportunity at that point to control the situation, make sure they got the right definitions, make sure they got all the right repairability methodology planned out in advance before they show up, so you could have the right person. You guys can go check out the Defeating Unethical Engineer Tactics course online to get all the strategy necessary for that. But Chad Williams is going to have a class on assessing the repairability of asphalt shingle roofs drop in just a few months anyway. So you'll have a lot more to work with there. But I would recommend also, if you get one of these forensic desk engineer reports, to just send them a copy of this video. I don't think that this person probably has done a sufficient job to be able to come up with an opinion of their own. Would you say that's fair, Chad?
I think that there's a lot of questions, and I think that the licensure boards are going to have to take up that question. But I will also add this: if they do send out an engineer to the field, the most important thing to figure out from both the adjuster and the engineer is what is the scope of work. Because if they're asked to discuss repairability and they're out there doing something completely unrelated, you need to say, hey, wait a minute, the question is repairability. How are we going to establish this? Not what's the extent of damage. I mean, I had one I was on recently where we're already past the point where they've already identified damage. They've already paid out a significant amount of money on this claim. The only question was, what's the composition of the roof? And the engineer gets out there and he's back there trying to go back to documenting the site, whether there was hail and all this. I'm like, but the scope is how many layers from the roof? It's just like, why are we going back all the way to here when this is the question?
It's like they know what their role really is without having to be asked.
At
least it seems that way.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate it, Chad. We'll end this here. If you guys have any more questions about this issue, I think that we're going to talk about this a lot more. I'm going to have Chad on a full live about that so you can get his questions answered, but that's going to be later on in September. So that'll be it for now. Thanks, Chad.
All right. Have a good day.